What up, folks? It's your boy Tim again, also known as Chicago in the Corner. Day 3 is coming up. Derek Chauvin, the trial of Derek Chauvin. This is trying to get justice for the death of George Floyd. And of course, we got to talk about it. What else would you expect? Just want to analyze what we've heard so far. I mean, anything new come out? Any changes in your expectations? As far as this channel was concerned, not a lot. What has new really come out? Not much from what we've been speculating for the last almost year now since this happened last June. Only thing I've seen so far, looks like the prosecutor has stepped up the amount of time that Derek Chauvin, former officer Derek Chauvin, was on the neck or head area of George Floyd from 8 minutes and 46 seconds to 9 minutes and 29 seconds. I don't know what much of a difference does that make, but that is another, 30 some odd, 40 some odd seconds on the man. I don't know if that's going to play a lot in the mind of a jury, because probably how you feel about 9 minutes and 29 seconds on somebody's neck, you'd probably feel the same way about 8 minutes and 46 seconds. They're both a very long time. The last 5 minutes, now this is something I had not heard until this trial came up. The last 5 minutes, 5+ minutes, I believe they said 4 minutes and some odd, 20 some odd seconds, George Floyd was struggling, yelling, "I can't breathe," twitching back and forth, pleading for his mom, all of this stuff. 4 minutes and some odd seconds. That last 5+ minutes that he was on his neck, George Floyd was not moving, saying anything at all, or even conscious. So that is a big piece of new information that I was not aware of, and I'm assuming that a lot of viewers of the trial was not aware of either. So you're talking 5 minutes on the neck of an unconscious man. The reason why that has some significance is because up until now, a lot of people have been saying that even if you do want to convict the cop, it's not like he got out of the car intending to kill George Floyd, or it wasn't intentional murder. Well, when you start saying you're on the neck of a guy for more than 5 minutes, it starts to step it up from the murder 3 manslaughter area, potentially to something else a little bit more sinister. It's obviously not premeditated, but it definitely starts to lean more towards the intentional side. Now, that's not to say that the jury is going to buy that. I mean, that is what is being presented. And so far, entering day 3, the defense has not countered and said the 9 minutes and 29 seconds is wrong, or that George Floyd maintained some form of consciousness that last 5 minutes. So they're not disputing that he was potentially unconscious and the guy was still in his neck for another 5 minutes. Now, keep in mind, it was the paramedics that showed up and asked Derek Chauvin to get off of the guy's neck. So he was on his neck all the way up until the point where the ambulance arrived. My question would be, why would you call for an ambulance if you still think the guy is rowdy enough to remain on his neck? I mean, if he's fighting, you stay on his neck, or you do whatever you got to do to restrain him. But if you're calling for help, why are you still on the neck of a guy who clearly needs help? Feel free to talk about that in the comments. I would love to hear what you got to say, because that's very interesting to me. And also, too, in regards to looking at it from, was it an unintentional death that the cop was responsible for, which may be manslaughter versus murder 2 and murder 1. You do have several, or at least 2 to 3 witnesses. It was 4 witnesses yesterday, 2 of them juveniles, one a paramedic, one an MMA fighter. We will talk about those. At least 2 of those witnesses stated that they saw Derek Chauvin, former officer Derek Chauvin, grind his knee into George Floyd harder, put more weight on him. And one of those was that paramedic. She stated that he was on top of George Floyd, and his foot came in the air, and there was nothing to balance his weight on. So it wasn't like he was leaning up against the car with his body on George Floyd. He was balancing all of his weight on George Floyd. That's what the paramedic stated in the trial. So now it starts to look, like I said, they're trying to make more of a case. They're going for, even though they're going after him on the manslaughter murder 3, they're trying to also strengthen their attempts to take those swings at murder two. I don't think they have a chance in hell for murder one, but murder two would probably be a lengthy prison sentence for a guy already in his 40s. So that's not something to shake a stick at. I mean, I'm in my late 40s. You give me 20 years in prison, that's, predominantly most of my viable life. So he don't need 40, 50 years where some people maybe, you should get 40, you should get life. 20, 30 years, I would say even 15. Shit, 15 years will put me damn near in my 60s. That's not a short period of time. Well, it won't quite put me in my 60s doing the math in my head, but it's a long time. It would put me towards the end of my working career and, take the rest of the little viability we have in our lives. I mean, so no, it's not something to laugh off as a short sentence. I mean, I'm sure there are people who want this guy to serve forever, and there are people who want him to get off. Fact of the matter is that the state of Minnesota does not have capital punishment, and there are going to be people who are not happy unless this guy is put to death. And that's just not going to happen. That's, you're taking a pipe dream. I don't believe the guy is going to serve the rest of his life in prison. Like I said, viable life versus, he could live to be 80. He could spend the last 15 years of his life as a free man, last 20 years of his life as a free man. But most likely, he will serve some time. It's just murder 3, 2, or 1. That's my opinion now. That is my opinion. We're still fighting back and forth with the toxicology report, and that has not been presented yet. We're gonna probably hearing from medical professionals, giving their testimony on what was in George Floyd's system. Excuse me, because that is going to be very important. Was he walking around with a lethal dose of drugs in his system? And are we to believe that even if the police had not interacted with this guy, he was going to drop dead within the next 10, 15 minutes or so? That's kind of where the police are taking it, is that he was so drugged up. He was a walking dead man. So I don't know how that's going to go, but I'm very curious to find out what they present in terms of medical professionals to defend that toxicology report, because that's what they're aiming for, and that's what's going to have to be taken apart. Fact of the matter is, he was on drugs. I mean, there's no way of denying that. Everybody admits he had a drug problem, so you cannot just ignore that. Like I said, I'm really curious to see where that's going to go. So we go to the witnesses. First, they started off with the MMA guy, the black guy who stated that he trains in MMA and he's a fighter or whatever. So they brought him on to back up the belief that George Floyd was put in constricting holes around his neck, cutting off circulation to his jugular or whatever you want to call it. Also, cutting off his airway, and the guy was kind of going back and forth on that. I think that the video kind of, in my opinion, is fairly self-explanatory, that if you are on somebody's neck, you're probably going to cut off the airway or maybe their blood supply to their brain. That part was not really all that interesting. I mean, I think he made for a good witness for the prosecutor, but it was fun to watch the defense, because the defense was trying to paint him as an angry guy. I mean, and he was angry. He tried to deny it, but there's no doubt you're calling the guy a bum. You're throwing around F-bombs at the cops. He even told the cops, if one of you guys touched me like that, I would slap the fuck out of you. So there's no doubt that he was angry. He just was on the stand trying to bounce that back at them, because that was their goal, is to portray him as an angry guy, and maybe, I guess, lead the jury to believe that what he thought he was seeing, his perception was going to be awful because he was angry. They also made that attempt to do that to the paramedic. They did not take that approach with the children, even though virtually everybody out there were yelling. They all were heckling the cops, no doubt. I'd be surprised if the cops present any witness that was on the scene that speaks in their behalf, because even the 911 operator that dispatched the cops to the location, there was a camera, a city camera on top of one of the light poles or whatever you want to call it, that was actually aimed right at the scene. And the 911 operator from her headquarters was actually taking glimpses of the scene, and she testified that they were on George Floyd's neck for so long, she thought the camera had froze. She was wondering, like, why isn't this over with yet? Like, why are they just kind of sitting there paused on this guy? So she actually stated that she thought the camera actually had froze. They were there that long. So I'd be very surprised if anyone at the scene ends up testifying for the defense, but we'll see. And it was also interesting to go from the MMA guy, which, like I said, the defense tried to paint him as angry, and in my opinion, they did a successful job. Even though the guy was denying that he was angry, the defense did a good job of painting him as angry. But I don't think it necessarily would have worked to their benefit, because it's hard to imagine anybody watching that with a calm demeanor. Everybody was angry. And you see, I mean, just based on what you see, the reaction that took place around the world, there was anger all over the place. So the idea that this guy is actually sitting there watching this and he's telling the cops, you do this, I'll slap the fuck out of you, and throwing around all kinds of expletives. He called the cop a bum well over a dozen times, but you're not angry? Nobody believes that. But like I said, because it's an expected emotional response, I don't know if proving that the MMA fighter was angry really helps out the defense at all. We went over to the paramedic that got on stand in full dress uniform, by the way, I guess to help out the portrayal that she is she's a first responder, no doubt, just like the cops were. If you got the same type of mentality you have, the Blue Lives Matter mentality for those who are protecting our safety, you'd have to have the same thing for the people that they call to help us when we're passing away as well, which is the paramedics. And she showed up and gave her testimony, and she got emotional when she made it clear that basically as a lifesaver, she wanted to help George Floyd, and the cops refused to let her do that, and she had to sit back and watch him die. She left the scene and also called 911 and reported what she saw, and stated that the cops were well out of their boundaries and what they did to the guy was wrong. So I believe her testimony absolutely helped the prosecution or the prosecutors. The defense once again tried to somewhat paint her as angry. Were you mad at what you were watching? Like I said, I don't know where they were going with that, just to try to say the crowd was angry, other than maybe to say that they thought they saw something that they did not see, because just simply out of sheer anger toward police. We'll see if that backfires or not. But right now, I think that we've seen most of the witnesses that are in favor of the prosecution. I'm very curious to see what will happen once the defense start presenting as witnesses. Most likely, because, like I said, they're pursuing a drug overdose avenue. Their best witnesses are going to be medical professionals. I mean, whoever, the guy who done the autopsy in the beginning did say George Floyd had a lot of drugs in the system. I don't know if that individual is going to be the one testifying for them, but I'm assuming that they're going to have more than one, because we all know that you can go to one doctor and get a second opinion from another doctor. It's not uncommon for somebody to die, be diagnosed as something, and find out later maybe the ex-wife or somebody was a black widow. They dig the person up and found out, no, he didn't die of a heart attack, she poisoned him. So doctors can get it wrong. I mean, certainly in the COVID-19 era, we know a lot of people have been diagnosed as dying, passing away from the coronavirus when it was actually something else. So it's not that we have to only go by what the first autopsy said, or the second said, or the third said. And that's where we're going to have the back and forth in regards to this case, because you're going to have conflicting testimony coming from the medical professionals. But right now, that's all we got right now on the second day of this. I'm curious to see if you've been watching it at all. Most likely a lot of us are out in the working world. I drive for a living, so I'm able to listen and stream this all day long. But a lot of people, if you're sitting in front of a cubicle all day, or you're stocking shelves, you're making fries, you're operating a dump truck or something, you just don't have the time to watch this. You're going to be getting snippets of it on the news, and hopefully from guys like yours truly. You can come to me, I can talk to you for a while. If you got any questions you want to ask in the comments about what I think, or you want to state your point, go ahead and do that, because as you know, I respond to all comments. Day 3 coming up today. I'm going to ask that you do what I always ask you to do. Hit that like button if you like what I'm saying. If you totally disagree, you think George Floyd was going to drop dead of an overdose, no matter if the cops showed up or not. Go ahead and hit the dislike. And let me ask you this, Court. That brings one last point before I ask that you subscribe to this channel, which is what I always do. The last 5 minutes on George Floyd's neck while he was unconscious. Here's one of my theories. If George Floyd did indeed pass away of a drug overdose, we know that a person is ODing, there are things you can do to potentially revive them. Narcan is one big popular drug they use, particularly on heroin addicts and other opioids. But I'm not going to go into it because I don't know a lot about the medical profession. But I do know that they have drugs that they give individuals who have OD to hopefully bring them back to consciousness. That last 5 minutes, if George Floyd did die of an overdose, that last 5 minutes could have been spent trying to revive him. Narcan or giving him CPR, just a variety of things, sitting them up maybe to help move things around in the system. There's all types of suggestions, I would say, but it's just like if they bring you out of a pool after you drown. You're totally lifeless, you're blue in the face. That 5 minutes when they first bring you up, chest compressions, airway, I mean, there's things you can do. But if you just lay the person on the ground for 5 minutes and do nothing, then start, the chances of reviving are going to be less. So if we're going to argue that he died of a drug overdose, then it becomes an issue of, well, what should he have done after the guy died? Should you just still stay on his neck for 5 minutes? Because my biggest issue is, if you're used to somebody struggling and resisting arrest like a 19-year veteran of the police department would be, wouldn't you know that the individual under you has not moved? I mean, you're still on his neck. He's not moving. He's not twitching. He's not talking. At what point are you responsible to quit restraining the individual that's resisting arrest? And I'm saying this from a standpoint where I'm giving total credence to the idea that he was resisting arrest, he was high on drugs, and he even died of a drug overdose. I'm actually entertaining all of that and simply still saying, at what point, when he's no longer moving, he's no longer struggling, are you responsible to actually get up off of him and, put him in the car and go to the police station, or in this case, get him help? Because it's crazy that you would think it was so big of an emergency that you would put an urgent call. They didn't just make a normal call for medical backup or to have the paramedics come to the scene. They placed an urgent call. So you're telling the paramedics, this is very urgent, we need you to get here immediately. But when they arrive, you're still standing on top of the guy and they have to ask you to get up. So there's some weird stuff in there. Once again, I would love to hear what you have to say, because I'm sure some of you think I got this wrong. There are plenty of people who do believe that Derek Chauvin did nothing wrong. So if you're one of those people, post it in the comments. We can hash it out. There is a lot more trial left. This is expected to go on for about a month. We're only in day 2, or day 3 starts today. So there will be future videos, and I would love to entertain your comments, and we can hash this out. We can go back and forth. Subscribe. Hit the like button. Don't like what I'm talking about at all, feel free to hit the dislike button. We can talk about that too. Anyway, this is your boy Chicago out. Day 3, let's get it on.